Hey, what's up, guys? Hello, Football Talk here. We've reached my final positional rankings for the 2020 NFL Draft with this long-awaited, much-discussed quarterback class. To me, a lot of people look at this group completely wrong. I don't see this top tier of 4 guys, but to me, there's 2 players who I think are top 10 prospects, and then there's the second tier with another 2 quarterbacks who I don't even look as first-round prospects. And then after that, there's 4 more guys who I would even consider with a pick on day 2. And then really after that, it gets very slim. However, I think there's a couple of very intriguing developmental prospects and some guys that nobody really talks about right now. So I want to shed some light on those now. So let's dive right into it. At number 1, I have Joe Burrow from the LSU Tigers, former 2-time Gatorade Ohio Player of the Year, and actually an All-State point guard. Never quite lived up to that recruiting status for the nearby Buckeyes, as he was a backup to JT Daniels for the first 2 years and then lost out to Dwayne Haskins the following spring. Decided to transfer to LSU then, where he had kind of an average 2018, but then put up a historic season last year, completed a nation-leading 76.3% of his passes for almost 5,700 yards, while averaging 10.8 yards per attempt, despite throwing well over 500 passes. And he put up an NCAA record 60 touchdown passes, whilst leading the Tigers to a national title. Burrow has the intelligence to determine defenses pre-snap and the accuracy to carve them up from within the pocket. He finds open space and trusts his receivers to get there, especially on those rainbow throws over the top of defenders, right into the bucket of his receivers. I also think Burrow has some of the best pocket presence I've ever evaluated from a college prospect. Consistently keeps 2 hands on the ball and buys extra time while finding space within the pocket, not really having to get off script immediately. Burrow is super tough and kind of weirdly elusive as a runner. Burnt the defense quite a bit for crucial conversions and averaged 8.6 yards per scramble. Of the top 17 quarterbacks in this class, Burrow is the only one whose passer rating actually went up under pressure, whilst it went down about 30 points for the average quarterback. And he was a star in big games versus Texas on that 3rd and 17 situation where he threw the game-deciding touchdown versus Alabama, where he came through time and time again as Tua and Bama tried to fight back. Then the college football semifinal versus Oklahoma, where he threw 7 touchdowns in just 3 quarters basically. And then Clemson, when he struggled a little bit early on to decipher the defensive looks that he was presented with by the Tigers, but ultimately came through in the second half and still threw 5 touchdowns. So the negatives with Burrow, he doesn't really have elite arm strength to make those drive throws from one hash to the opposite sideline. He also had great pocket integrity and a really good system by Joe Brady and Steve Ensminger, whilst also having 2 likely first-round receivers, a top 50 running back in Clyde Edwards-Helaire, and a really dependable tight end in Thaddeus Moss. I think a good 1,000 yards of his passes came on screenplays and just slant routes to Jefferson and slot. And you have to question, is he kind of a one-year wonder? He had a good 2018 season. I liked him. I really liked his toughness back then, but he never played quite at that level that he had last season for just 1 year. So that is kind of a question mark, even though he obviously had a great season. So while Burrow may not have the biggest arm, his combination of athleticism, poise, toughness, and accuracy kind of makes him a shoe-in for the first overall pick to me. He always came up big when his team really needed him, and even though his supporting cast helped him with that, you also have to think that he was a big reason for their success and where they have gone, the way they are looked at now, getting different jobs for both his coordinators, with Joe Brady obviously becoming the offensive coordinator of the Panthers, all those other guys on offense around him being looked at as highly coveted draft picks and stuff like that. A close second is Tua Tagovailoa from the SEC rival Alabama, former Hawaii High School Player of the Year and the top dual for a quarterback recruit. He mainly was in for mop-up duty as a freshman until the second half of the 2017 National Championship game. As we all know now, how he led the Tide back to a huge comeback over Georgia in that one. He beat out Jalen Hurts the following camp and never really looked back. As a sophomore, he completed 69% of his passes for just under 4,000 yards, and 43 touchdowns compared to 6 interceptions only. And last season, he once again was on a historical pace, completing over 71% of his passes and 33 touchdowns compared to 5 picks in just 9 weeks. But then suffered that career-threatening hip injury, obviously, and now his future is kind of up in the balance, but still being looked at as a potential top 5 pick at this point. So Tua is a great distributor of the ball with the arm and poise in the pocket to get everybody involved. To me, he's the most natural passer in this class and has the quickest release of anybody out there. He's really violent with hitting the back foot and working up into the pocket. His eyes and feet are linked together really well, and he forces the defense to defend every single inch of grass on the field. Tua shows those quick twitch movements with rapid turns of the shoulders as he works through his progressions, and is really lightning quick to set his feet and get ready for the pass. Kind of reminiscent of a Drew Brees in that area, even though I don't want to throw out comparisons like that. Tua to me is very elusive inside the pocket, avoids a lot of sacks and negative plays by getting rid of the ball and buying extra time. However, on the scramble drill, something that I really like is that his eyes are always up. He never takes them down, looks at the rush and for a lane to escape, but actually is looking downfield to his receivers. However, Tua also had 4 potential first-round receivers around him. A bunch of passes that he threw were behind the line of scrimmage, or he just threw a quick screen pass to a guy like Henry Ruggs, and he just took it 80 yards to the house. You have to look at Tua as a little bit undersized, as an average athlete for the position, who tends to hold on to the ball and puts himself at risk with that at times, and he just isn't nearly as effective when he comes off that first read. He also misses some defenders in the underneath coverage and predetermines some throws because those guys were open all the time in that Bama offense. And one of the plays that sticks out to me right now is the pick 6 he had versus Clemson in the 2018 National Championship game, where he just thought his receiver would be wide open on a quick out route. So the injury history is obviously well documented with Tua. Had surgeries on both his hip and ankles. But to me, it's less about the hip rather than him being able to stay healthy in the future. I think he supports himself in some situations to be vulnerable, and there are definitely some concerns. But the way he works through his progression is almost like a computer, and the way he put up one of the greatest 2-year stretches of any quarterback in the toughest conference in college football is really impressive. And while those injuries are obviously a concern, he also showed a lot of toughness playing through them over the last couple of years. At number 3, I have Justin Herbert from Oregon. Always had strong ties to an Oregon program, with his grandfather being a wide receiver for the program back in the 60s, and his family attending many games when Herbert was still young. So it was really no surprise that Herbert decided to stay in Eugene after being an all-state quarterback in high school. He already made 7 starts as a true freshman, and then was the offensive MVP in 2017, despite missing 5 games with a broken collarbone. Herbert could have easily left the Ducks back in a year ago already, but decided to return, and it really paid off, putting up career bests in completion percentage with 66.8%, passing yards with almost 3,500, and passing touchdowns with 32 of them, while also only throwing 6 interceptions. At 6'6", 230 plus pounds, Herbert probably has the most talented arm in this entire draft, can throw the ball 50 plus yards with just a flick of the wrist, and throws some very impressive darts all over the field. Herbert is the best at completing those opposite sideline throws and really putting the ball on the line. And he also doesn't mind holding on to the ball and taking a hit to deliver a big pass when the receiver still has to run himself open. Herbert also displays some shiftiness to avoid the rush, and he's a true threat to pull the ball on zone replays. Really picked up as a runner later on in the 2019 season, highlighted by those 3 rushing touchdowns versus Wisconsin in the Rose Bowl. Herbert went from a no-huddle offense in 2018 to more of a run-heavy approach with a lot of play action last year, and the offense wasn't very creative with a bunch of screens and then faking those and throwing deep passes off it. But he's had an excellent pre-draft process, running a 4.68 in the 40 at the combine to show off some of the athleticism and having an excellent throwing showcase there. He also was the best quarterback and actually was named the game MVP at the Senior Bowl. However, I think there's plenty of concerns with Herbert as well. Has to do a better job anticipating throws and not having to wait for his receivers to be open. Can kind of get locked in on that first read at times. He doesn't read the field particularly well and lacks some awareness for blitzes. He also doesn't put that second hand on the ball consistently, which led to 26 total fumbles in 43 career games. And as a pure thrower, he's kind of mechanic with his motion, and that front shoulder tends to freeze a little bit, limiting his ability to rotate through. The biggest concern, however, to me, is that he was only present physically in a lot of the big games. He wasn't really there mentally and kind of was a deer in the headlights in some games that Oregon probably should have won. Over 700 of Herbert's passing yards last season came off screen passes, and there are many question marks to me with him when it comes to reading the field and being accurate on the short level. But there's also a lot of flashes of brilliance. And when you look at the Senior Bowl and the Combine, how he has improved his stock since then, he's likely to secure the spot in the top 10. However, I wouldn't touch him before the end of the first round, maybe even early second, because there's a lot of question marks, and whoever thinks he can just step in week 1 and be great out there probably will be disappointed. Alright, and at number 4 I have Jordan Love from Utah State, just a 3-star recruit of California. Utah State was actually the only FBS program to offer Love a full scholarship. However, he quickly jumped into the action for the Aggies, starting 6 games in 2017, and the following season he had a really great year, completing 64% of his passes for about 3,500 yards and 32 touchdowns compared to 6 interceptions, as Utah State averaged a ridiculous 47.5 points per game and finished 22nd in the final poll. Those numbers looked a lot different for Love under the new coaching staff. The percentage and yardage were kind of similar, but he only threw 20 touchdowns and led the FBS with 17 interceptions on the season. I really believed before the 2019 season even started that Love would be a first-round prospect this year. He has a dynamic arm and skill set to change up the arm angles and just the speeds he throws the balls with. He's sudden to snap his feet and turn those shoulders to get ready for a pass. And I like how he uses little look-offs to open up underneath throws. Has the velocity to drill some tight window throws over the middle, and even when his receivers were well covered, he could put it to a spot where only they could put their hands on it. Love is a way of escaping the rush, and he can throw those 50-plus yard balls off the wrong foot like it's nothing, make some spectacular plays, which is where those Patrick Mahomes comparisons have come from. In 2019, when you look at the drop-off of numbers, his top 3 receivers were gone. His check-down option, Darwin Thompson, left, and the coaching staff called very repetitive plays, not a lot of creativeness there. Of his 17 interceptions, 2 were actually tipped at the defensive lineman, 3 came on Hail Marys. Another 3, it seemed like it was fairly obvious that the receiver had run the wrong route, so you can't put all the blame on him. Still, you kind of overlook the fact that he took a big step back last season. He completed 2% less of his passes for 1.4 yards per attempt less, and he tends to throw some short passes with only his arm and doesn't really bring his lower half forward with him. There's too many of those lob passes into traffic where he just throws the ball up for grabs, and 26.5% of his completions were behind the line. He really looked bad against the 2 Power 5 teams he faced last season. When you look at LSU and Wake Forest, I think those Mahomes comparisons are pretty crazy, since that is the most talented guy I've probably ever seen. But Love has a lot of similar qualities when it comes to being a flexible athlete who can change up his arm angles and releases and kind of make magic happen off script. However, there are also some boneheaded decisions, and he really pressed in 2019. To me, he's an intriguing prospect, but you need to surround him with the appropriate weapons and a creative play caller to be able to rein in that kind of backyard style of play. Closing up my top 5 is Jacob Eason from Washington, the 2015-16 Gatorade National Player of the Year and a 5-star recruit from the Seattle area. Started 12 of 13 games for Georgia his freshman year, but injured his knee the following season in the first game. And once Jake Fromm took over and led the Dogs to a national championship game appearance, he's never really got his job back, and so we decided to return home. And after a transfer year, he had a pretty strong season for UW. Completed 64.2% of his passes for over 3,100 yards, 23 touchdowns, and 8 interceptions. Eason has prototype measurements at 6'6", 230 pounds, with the arm strength that is second to none in this class. The ball comes out of his hand beautifully, and he can throw lasers all over the field, whether it's corner routes to the opposing sideline, singing the ball in on curl routes, but also being able to lob the ball over the underneath defense, which I thought he looked really good at last season as well. Eason has experience in a pro-style offense, with turning his back to the defense off play action and making big throws down the field. He really excels in the quick game, but can also hit his back foot and push the ball deep on those deeper drops very well. And he has the arm talent to make plenty of throws off platform. With his big hands, he also only fumbled 7 times in his career, in 32 games actually. However, there are definitely some negatives here as well. Locks his feet in the ground too much and doesn't really rotate through in a dynamic fashion. He's a below average athlete, no real threat as a runner, as he finished his career with minus 126 rushing yards. And while some general GMs might be different, I would have liked to see him go head first a couple of times to pick up some crucial third downs, where I thought he slid a couple of yards short. I obviously didn't like that. What I like even less is the way he completely panics under pressure at times and just throws the ball off his back foot, kind of puts it up there. You saw one of those plays versus Utah last season when Jalen Johnson had a pick 6 against Eason, when the Huskies were actually in control of the game, but Eason just tossed it to the opposite sideline and put it up there for Johnson to take it back to the house. I really thought Eason should have returned for the 2020 season to develop some parts of his game and be able to show that he can step up in big games instead of shrinking in them. To me, his playstyle is more daring than reckless, however, and I think you can shape him into something special if you give him a year behind an already established starter. Just don't throw him into the action right away. At number 6, I have Jalen Hurts from Oklahoma. Former top dual threat quarterback in 2016. When he came to Alabama, Nick Saban actually had the plan of splitting time between him and the other quarterback, Blake Barnett, there. However, that plan got kind of thrown out the window after just one game. Went on to start every game of the next 2 years for the Crimson Tide, putting up almost 5,000 passing yards and 1,800 rush yards, while also scoring 51 touchdowns and taking care of the ball. Only had 1 interception as a sophomore. However, he got benched in the national title game, obviously, in 2017. Lost his job the following spring. Got another chance to flip the script a little bit the following season when he came back as he took over for Tua versus those Bulldogs. And after transferring to Oklahoma, he had one of the better seasons of any quarterback in the country, completing 70% of his passes for 3,851 yards and 32 touchdowns compared to 8 interceptions. Also added 1,300 rush yards and another 20 touchdowns on the ground. Hurts is a robust build at 6'2", 220 pounds, and he's come a long way as a pocket passer to me. Looked much better already behind Tua in 2018, and then took it to a whole different level under Lincoln Riley last season. His throwing motion has become much more fluid this offseason as well, I thought. And you see him really throw some tight spirals downfield and also be pretty accurate off platform. As prolific as he was as a passer last season, he really took over as a runner in the latter parts of 2019. Has great shake and some head fakes in the open field, but actually more of the running back mentality with the weightlifting background to back it up. Ran over several defensive backs and broke free from plenty of sacks as well. What stands out about Hurts is that gamer mentality he has. Lost his job initially, obviously, at Bama, but got his revenge versus Georgia. And then another time he really showed it was that 28-3 comeback last season versus Baylor their first time around. With that being said, Hurts clearly gets the ball to his targets, but he hasn't mastered the ability to use the appropriate passes, whether it's having to throw it on a line, put some touch on the ball, arc on it, whatever it may be. He tends to not really point that front shoulder at his receiver and limits the torque he can build up that way. He's made huge strides, obviously, as a pocket passer, but he still takes off on too many occasions and leaves opportunities on the table. You see the ball drop below his belt a lot of times, and a lot of that production at Oklahoma was manufactured by the system of Lincoln Riley and having a superstar receiver like CeeDee Lamb who can make your stats look a lot better with the stuff he can do after the catch. A game you have to look at is the Peach Bowl versus LSU, where his game kind of crumbled a little bit, very inaccurate in that game, and the LSU was able to expose some of the things that those Big 12 defenses couldn't. However, I think there's a lot of things to like about Hurts, whether it's his competitiveness, his arm strength, or mobility that really stand out. To me, he's more of a developmental prospect who needs to learn how to make the most of his throws and be able to incorporate more subtle movements inside the pocket and be a more efficient decision maker. I think he can be a Tyrod Taylor plus. So in the right system, he could be a top 20 quarterback at some point, but I think he would benefit from being able to learn a little bit as well and still grow as a pocket passer. Next up, I have Jake Fromm from Georgia, former 5-star recruit who initially committed to Alabama, but then decided to stay home when Kirby Smart took over the Georgia's job. Fromm was inserted quickly into the starting lineup when Jacob Eason went down with an injury in the season opener of 2017, and he never really looked back. Led the number 1 ranked Bulldogs to the national championship against Bama that I've already referenced a couple times now. Put up career highs in 2018 in completion percentage with over 67%, yards per attempt with 10.1, and passing touchdowns with 30 of those. Put up very similar numbers last season and has now led the Georgia Bulldogs to 3 straight SEC championship game appearances. The first thing that stands out about Fromm is the clean footwork he showcases, whether it's in the quick game, 5 or 7 step drops, and resetting of play action. He's best in rhythm, where he can let the ball go on that final step and throw with anticipation to a spot. He's outstanding at lofting the ball to where only his receivers can get it, especially working with taller receivers, whether it's putting it on the back shoulder or protecting his guys underneath on those hook routes by throwing the ball away from the defender. Fromm distributes the ball around his receiving corps very well, and he can manipulate defenses with subtle shoulder and ball fakes to set up those different throws. I also thought Fromm protected the ball really well for Georgia, which was a run-heavy and defense-oriented team. Only had what Pro Football Focus calls turnover-worthy plays, only had 28 of those, and only 4 fumbles recovered by the defense throughout his career. And while the team was obviously built around the run game and the defense, when he was relied upon, Fromm delivered ever since his freshman year, and I really like how he defeats the blitz by releasing the ball early and putting it to different spots. With that being said, Fromm is routinely a tick late and has average arm talent at best. Needs a bit of a wind-up on those power throws and was undercut on some quick out routes. Last season, over a quarter of his passes were deemed uncatchable, and he's worked behind a sturdy offensive line. Despite that, he has to do a better job of feeling edge pressure and stepping up into the pocket. In addition to that, he has a bad habit of flipping the ball for some reason. To me, Fromm's a really solid but not very exciting prospect. Can obviously be productive right away in the right system for me, but the upside is kind of capped here, not the same as it is with some other guys on this list. I think at the very worst, he would be one of the best backups in the league. Can come in with a cool head and a lot of toughness to win some games for you. And at number 8, I have Anthony Gordon from Washington State. Has a basic background actually, as he was drafted by the New York Mets originally, but instead follows this true love in football. Had to sit out a year due to transfer rules at Washington State and then lost out the competition to Gardner Minshew in 2018. But the one season he did have, he put up some big numbers, completed almost 500 of his 689 passes for almost 5,600 yards and 48 touchdowns compared to 16 interceptions. Gordon is 6'2", 205 pounds. He had more dropbacks than any other quarterback in the country of 740. Shows bouncy feet and the rapid ability to set his feet and release the ball. Patiently works through his progressions, and he's best at layering throws in between the linebackers and safeties to where his receivers don't have to break stride at all and really have some good opportunities to make a run after catch. Gordon to me also has somewhat underrated ability to pick up some crucial third downs. And what really stands out is the way he can buy time inside the pocket without having to go away from the structure of the play. I think he sees the field really well, and he can look off some underneath defenders to open up opportunities for guys sitting down their routes underneath. You also see some sidearm action from Gordon on those hook and stick routes to avoid the rush being able to knock the ball down. However, the negatives here with Gordon, I think he needs to swing that back leg through more, and his feet aren't quite in sync with his upper body yet. Has a bad tendency of patting the ball, and he swings it all around. I mean, it was kind of tough to watch the ball go like underneath his belt and then all the way over his shoulder without even having the intent to throw in the ball and giving defense opportunities to make a play on it possibly. He also saw some ill-advised throws and decisions, and his numbers were kind of blown up by that air raid system under Mike Leach. His 783 screen yards actually led the country last season as well. To me, Gordon has more arm talent than most of those Wazoo quarterbacks have had recently. His loose ball handling habits have to be cleaned up, obviously, to me, but he's a pretty natural passer with good field awareness and pocket movement. So I think he should be able to compete for a starting job early on. Really like a lot of parts of his game. And as I've already mentioned, after the top 8 now, I don't think there's another guy who I would select before the 5th or 6th round maybe. Definitely some guys I like their skill set and I would like to develop, but nobody I would take a chance on with an early pick. However, this next guy at number 9 is somebody who I think doesn't get any of the talk he deserves. That's Khalil Tate of Arizona. After putting up over 2,000 yards passing and rushing as a high school senior, he was a top 10 dual threat quarterback the year he came out. As just a 17-year-old, he became the first true freshman to start at quarterback for Arizona. The following season, he started as on the bench, but when he was reinserted into the starting lineup when the starter actually went down, he won a record 4 straight Pac-12 Offensive Player of the Year awards and really emerged as kind of a Heisman contender, actually finishing the year with almost 3,000 total yards and 26 touchdowns while averaging a crazy 9.1 yards per carry. After that, these last 2 years, the coaching staff changed and a lot of things didn't go right, but he still produced over 5,000 yards and 45 touchdowns over that stretch. Tate measures in at 6'2", 215 pounds, with more of a running back build, but also has a cannon off an arm. A lot of times he's labeled as a pure runner, but to me can throw with touch, arc, and good ball placement. Also has the zip on the ball to complete passes with his good coverage, and he can make some unbelievable off-platform throws, whether it's scrambling one way and completing a post route, streaking away from him, or drilling a throw at the sideline. A lot of really special throws there. Tate is also an unbelievable open field runner with the speed to run away from defensive backs, having scored multiple 50-plus yard touchdowns. But what separates him from a lot of other dual threat guys, he also has that power to drop the shoulder on bigger guys. And what really stands out is the impact he had with the Wildcats, whether it's on zone replays, where you see the backside edge defender and the linebacker leveraged his way, as well as the safety coming down, just because he presents such a threat. And he really rides backs on those pop passes, kind of RPO style, where he had a lot of success when he was allowed to do those. To me, what Kevin Sumlin and the coaching staff did at Arizona to him was kind of criminal, trying to make it into a pure pocket passer, whether it was the play calling they used, situational awareness, all that kind of stuff. I really suffered from those, and I think he could have been a much more productive player and a much more coveted player if that coaching staff had found a way to stay intact, or somebody else would have come in that would have made things a little easier for him and would have allowed him to show his strength instead of making him into something he's not. However, obviously there are also a bunch of negatives here. He's far from a refined prospect. You see him rush his throwing motion a lot of times when he has somebody wide open nearby, and he just tries to get it out there quickly, but loses his accuracy because of that. With him also, the feet aren't perfect link to the upper body yet, and I think he needs to incorporate more subtle pocket movement instead of turning everything into a scramble drill as soon as there's a rush coming at him. When defenses started to stack the box against him in some games later on, he struggled to be able to drop back like 30 plus times a game and just win from within the pocket. And there are plenty of games where it feels like he isn't mentally checked in right away and it takes him a while to get going, really. To me, Tate is one of the more fascinating quarterback prospects in this class. The coaching staff and that young receiving corps he worked with really hurt his production, especially in the scramble drill where those guys didn't know how to work it quite yet. But to me, he's one of those kind of special athletes who may take a while to get into some games, and he's not quite ready to just win within the pocket right away. But he can get into the zone when he can start running and making plays off script. He was unstoppable in some games, especially early on in his career. His highlight reel is as fun to watch as anybody's in the country, but he needs to become more of a consistent player, and somebody has to be able to develop him at the next level. But the talent, to me, is definitely there. And closing out my top 10 is Nate Stanley from Iowa. Was a former multi-sport athlete from Wisconsin. However, his hometown Badgers passed on him, and he moved to Iowa City instead. Had to sit his first year with the Hawkeyes, but has started every single game these last 3 years. Was a team captain in all of them, and over his career he's averaged 58.3% completion percentage, almost 2,800 yards passing, and 68 touchdowns total compared to 23 interceptions. Stanley's that throwback under the center quarterback with a big arm and a massive frame. He can spin it with just about anybody and makes several what I want to call big boy throws down the field, making opposite hash throws and really excelling down the seams, especially working with tight ends. You see him have his feet set at 12 o'clock and then hit shallow crosses the other way or hitch routes on the outside without really having to shift his entire body that way. He was very comfortable on the center with different types, different depths of drops. Despite being a big body gunslinger, he has a pretty tight throwing motion. And what I really like to watch is those slick fakes he uses on play action. He can really hide the ball from the defense and sell the play that way. And he has some freakish big hands. When you see the way he's kind of loose with the ball, people hit him from the side, but somehow it just doesn't move in there. It's kind of weird to even fathom. However, to me, Stanley was one of the more confusing quarterbacks over these last few years. His game was really up and down on a weekly basis. You see him miss high and wide quite a bit and really struggle to keep the offense moving for stretches without being able to find a lot of easy completions. While I like his fearlessness in the pocket, he's just not really aware of bodies around him and puts the ball at risk that way. And he looks kind of like an old Big Ben Roethlisberger trying to get on the move and make something happen. So he's kind of a statue back there. The 2018 version of Nathan Stanley, if he would have gone into the draft about 10 years ago, he might have been a first-round pick. Stanley can really fire some bombs down the field, but he's also very inconsistent. To me, he's definitely worth a flyer on day 3, but I don't always love what I see. Skill set is definitely there. I'm not a great athlete, but there's definitely a place for him in the league if you can continue to grow with his game. Alright, today I have 4 other guys I want to mention here. Jake Luton from Oregon State, Bryce Perkins from Virginia, Cole McDonald from Hawaii, and James Morgan from Florida International. Let's work them down one after the other. First up, Luton, 6'6", 225 pounds with large hands. Really excels throwing the ball with timing and anticipation. I like the way he sets up his throw with some shoulder fakes, and he was 26 of 51 on deep balls, so those passes that travel 20 plus yards for the air last season. It's a very mature decision maker for me. However, I see his feet get a little antsy at times versus pressure and rushes passes, and he doesn't offer much off script in that way. Next up is Perkins, who's a dual threat quarterback who throws a very catchable ball and works the entire field. Can really put air underneath the ball for his teammates to run underneath it, but also expose windows in the zone and for the ball with some velocity. He does a really nice job negotiating the pocket and is very elusive to extend plays that way. Exploits cracks as a runner and is really shifty in the open field. However, his footwork is very up and down, and he can get locked into his first reads, as well as taking his eyes down on the rush at times instead of keeping the eyes downfield and looking for his receiver streaking free, actually. Then there's Cole McDonald from Hawaii. Has a howitzer of an arm and is a great athlete, as we showed us at the Combine, with some of the best marks in all the disciplines there. With this guy, it's really bombs away, throws some perfect deep balls over the top of the defensive backs. Is also pretty efficient in the underneath areas in that run and gun offense they run at Hawaii. McDonald is fearless to fire the ball on the run, and he's really tough to break down in the open field. If someone asked me to describe him to them if they didn't watch him before, I would say he's kind of the Jameis Winston of college football last season, threw 17 interceptions, which led the FBS, and there's not much anticipation to his game, and really throws up some prayers, so there's a lot of refinement that has to be done, but the talent is clearly there. Then there's James Morgan from FIU, 6'4", 240 pounds, with plenty of arm and the frame to hang inside the pocket. He makes several tight window throws, especially hitting those honey hole shots versus cover 2 between the corner and the safety. Finds ways to get rid of the ball. Only 12 sacks last season, and he was easily the best quarterback at the East-West Shrine game. And he proved to me that he's more of an athlete than I thought at the Combine with some of the numbers he put up there. However, according to PFF, there were more turnover-worthy plays than big-time throws in each of the last 2 seasons. Morgan fades away too much on some of his throws, and he kind of whips it out there when he has a back in the flats or something, and he just wants to get it there quickly. Forces that guy to turn back around instead of being able to catch it and just get upfield with it. So to bring it back to my top 10, here again you have it. At number 1, Joe Burrow, LSU, has kind of established himself there. Most of it being healthy and having that great 2019 campaign. However, I think Tua is not too far away from him. Very natural passer with quick release, but obviously injury history being a large part of his draft stock. Then that second tier kind of to me with Herbert and Love, who both have tons of talent, but also a lot of things that still have to be cleaned up before I would trust them in the NFL. Then Eason's another one of those developmental guys who's not quite ready to start yet, but has a lot of talent, strongest arm in the draft to me. Then Jalen Hurts, who has definitely improved his ability to be a pocket passer, clean up some parts of his throwing motion. Still a lot to grow here as well, being able to anticipate throws and having a lot of his production due to the Oklahoma system. And kind of the opposite realm of that with Jake Fromm, who doesn't have that elite arm talent, but made a lot of big plays, really stepped up against competition, and wins by being a smart player. Anthony Gordon at number 8, who's the last of the top 8 guys, who I think somewhat worth a day 2 selection. Really interesting guy with a lot of things I like. Not very big, and definitely also some concerns, some things he needs to clean up when it comes to ball handling, but certainly something to work with. And then 2 guys who I don't see a lot of people talk about, Khalil Tate and Nathan Stanley, who both are very talented players, but kind of the systems they were in, they weren't allowed to shine as much as they would have been on other programs, but definitely have some talent that I want to invest in. However, also some time on day 3. That wraps up my positional draft rankings. You can find 5 out of my breakdowns on this channel and in-depth analysis at every other position on my page, HowLittle'sRealFootballTalk.com. You can find my social media channels in the description. Thanks for watching. I hope you enjoyed it. If you did, I would really appreciate it if you could leave a like or subscribe to this channel and or share it with your friends. I will be back later this week already with my top 100 big board. And then at the start of next week, I will put up my one and only mock draft of the year. Definitely excited for that. So until then, see you later. Peace.